November 1520, Stockholm. The sea wind bites, but inside the Three Crowns Castle, everything is warm and loud. Torches flare, tapestries glow, silver cups pass from hand to hand. The city celebrates a coronation. Christian II of Denmark has come to take the Swedish crown at last, and to end a long, ruinous war. On the gates hang proclamations of mercy, a general amnesty for anyone who fought against him. After siege and hunger, the people want to believe every word. In the cathedral, mitres gleam beside crowns. Archbishop Gustav Trolle, the man whose name has divided Sweden for years, stands near the new king. Only yesterday he received what he wanted most, his power restored and permission to judge those who pulled down his fortress and drove him from the realm. But for the moment, the music drowns politics. On a coronation day, even stubborn enemies bow their heads. The feasting lasts 3 days. In the great hall, empty barrels become benches. Wine runs without counting. The royal kitchens send out roasted swans and pies, thick with spices that cost their weight in gold. At the tables sit men who only weeks ago aimed arrows from the walls at Danish soldiers, and now raise toasts beside them. In the center of attention stands Christina Gyllenstierna, widow of Sten Sture the Younger. She led the city after her husband died on the ice of Lake Mälaren. Her resolve kept Stockholm standing until stores ran out. Now she accepts congratulations. Her young sons are at her side. No one should fear. The royal pardon says so. On the third morning, when the wine has soured in the mouth and the head still throbs, a smaller circle gathers in the royal chambers. Christian looks to Archbishop Trolle and nods. Soldiers file in. Doors across the fortress swing shut. The city does not yet know the feast is over, but the officers' faces are carved from stone. Those called worthy subjects yesterday are invited downstairs for a conversation. First the churchmen, Bishop Matthias of Strängnäs, Bishop Vincent of Skara. After them the nobles and councillors, the men who signed orders, toppled Trolle's walls, stripped his seals. No shouting, no blows. Everything is courteous. Merely a hearing about old ecclesiastical matters, they are told. Out in the streets, the roar fades to a whisper. More armed men appear at the gates. Dancers grow quiet. Danish captains hold the bridges and towers. Guns watch the quays. A few try to leave by boat, but the oarsmen are turned back. In the lower halls of the castle, servants set long benches and bring in inkstands. The trial will begin today. No one yet understands that the verdict was written before the questions. The hearing begins with ceremony meant to calm the room. Candles, a long table, parchment already waiting. Archbishop Trolle presents a list that is more accusation than inventory. It names the men who besieged his stronghold on stake, who seized church lands, who forced him from office. He declares that these are not political crimes. They are sins against Holy Church, which makes the offenders heretics. The royal pardon, he reminds everyone, does not protect heresy. The trap closes with a rustle of seals. Bishop Matthias protests that he acted under the lawful regency of Sten Sture. Bishop Vincent asks by what right a coronation feast turns into a tribunal. Trolle replies with canon citations and the calm of a man who has waited years for this table. The king sits very still. When he speaks, it is to say that the matter lies with the church and that he will not resist the judgment of God's ministers. Soldiers at the doors do the rest of the talking. Arrests spread through the castle like water through sand. Councillors are separated from their squires, merchants from their guild brothers, priests from their acolytes. Christina Gyllenstierna is placed under guard with her sons. She demands to see the text of the royal pardon that promised safety to all who submitted. An officer bows and says the parchment is safe in the royal chest. He does not bring it. Afternoon fades. In the courtyard, torches are set in iron brackets. The first names are called for sentencing in a side chamber, away from the hall where the feast had been. There is no defense and no time to prepare one. The charge is heresy for laying hands on a consecrated prelate and for destroying his fortress. The punishment under canon law is death and confiscation. The clerk writes the words at speed because the names keep coming. A messenger runs to the cathedral to fetch more ropes. The cries that follow carry into the square at the foot of the hill. People look up from the quay and ask one another if the king is executing thieves. Someone says it is worse. On the second list are men whose signatures kept the city alive last winter. A woman in the crowd begins to pray aloud, and others join her because prayer feels like the only wall left. By night, the courtyard is a theater of firelight and shadow. Guards lead the condemned out in groups. Some cling to the hope that this is a show of force and that mercy will come at the last moment. It does not. Blades rise and fall with methodical rhythm. Blood runs into the gutters that slope toward the sea. The bell of the cathedral tolls, then stops, then tolls again, as if the tower itself cannot decide whether to mark a feast or a slaughter. At dusk, the courtyards fill with torchlight and steam. The first to die are the churchmen. Bishop Matthias kneels on wet boards, hands bound, lips moving in prayer that no one can hear over the roar. The sword falls and his mitre rolls in the blood like a toy boat in a gutter. Bishop Vincent follows, then canons and abbots whose only crime was to stand on the wrong side of a siege. The crowd on the slope below the castle holds its breath as if silence might unmake what it sees. It does not. Names pour from the clerk's mouth until they blur. Councillors, captains, burghers, men who signed orders when winter was at the door and the granaries were low. Groups are marched to the great square and to the foot of the cathedral. Beheadings become routine, a rhythm as pitiless as a mill wheel. Heads are set on poles to make the lesson toll. The bell tries to keep pace, then falters, then quits altogether. Smoke and iron and salt thicken the air. Inside the fortress, Christina Gillenstierna sits under guard with her sons. From the window slit she cannot see the strokes, only the rising of sparks and the slow reddening of the sky. Somewhere in the keep, a chest door closes with a heavy thud. The royal pardon is safe, the officer said. Safe is a word that has lost its meaning. On the second day, the dead begin to outnumber the wagons. To keep plague from the gates, soldiers heap bodies and set them to burning in the outer yards. The wind carries the smell across the water to Södermalm, where a darker rite is prepared. By order of Archbishop Trolle, enemies are to be counted not only among the living. The corpse of Stensture is hauled from its grave, along with others named in the Bill of Heresy. What could not be broken in life will be shamed in death, and ash makes no martyrs. Word seeps through door cracks and under shutters. A man whispers that he saw a captain washing his sword at the fountain. A woman swears the king smiled as he spoke from a balcony about justice and the peace that follows firm law. Somewhere a child asks why the feast drums have changed their tune. No one answers. By nightfall of the third day, the gutters run clean again. Not because the killing has ceased, but because there is little left to do. Lists are shorter. Torches burn lower. The city stares at its own stones as if they belong to a stranger. In the taverns that dare open, there is no singing. On a slip of paper passed hand to hand, a new name is tried on the king, like a curse spoken under the breath. Tyrant. Beyond the walls, riders are already moving. One carries letters that justify everything in the language of canon and order. Another carries only fear north into the forests and iron hills, where men with long memories will hear and decide what a winter should become. Morning breaks on a city that smells of ash and salt. The torches have burned low, the cobbles are rinsed, and scribes nail proclamations to doors. The judgments are entered in a clean hand, goods seized for the crown, houses to be inventoried, widows to present themselves at the castle with titles and keys. Men who were pillars yesterday are now lines in a ledger and empty chairs at tables that still hold last night's cups. On Sodermalm, soldiers finish the darker work. A cart creaks with an ungentle cargo dug from church earth. Sten Sture the Younger, once the kingdom's regent, is hauled out and burned with others named in the bill of heresy. The act is meant to erase loyalties and to teach that uneven memory can be put to the torch. It does the opposite. People do not forget a fire they can see from the keys. Christina Gillenstierna is led from chamber to chamber under guard. Her children keep pace in solemn silence, brave because their mother's jaw is set. She asks again for the royal pardon that promised safety. The officer bows again and says the parchment is safe, as if safety were the word for a locked chest. By noon, she is informed that she will travel, not home, but south across the water, under escort. A ship waits with its hatches tarred and its name scraped from the stern. In the streets, the instruments of feast are carried out past the instruments of judgment. Barrels and platters, then ropes and pikes. A drummer who played at the coronation keeps his sticks hidden in his sleeves as he passes the square. The cathedral's bell rings the plain hour and nothing more. Even the gulls seem to circle higher than before, as if the air near the roofs has turned heavier. News runs ahead of horses. In Uppsala, a canon writes a careful summary for the chapter that reads like a weather report with blood in it. In the mining parishes of Dalarna, men in red coats of copper dust hear that bishops were cut down and that Sture was dragged from his grave. They look at the pine hills and the frozen river and say little because the first answer to such tidings is quiet. The king speaks from a balcony to a square that will not meet his eyes. He names justice as the mother of peace, rebellion as a sin that must be cauterized. He promises order. The words fall properly, one after another, and lie there. People remember the smell of iron more than the sentences. Then winter takes hold. The harbour ices along the edges. Patrols stamp their feet on the walls above the dark water. At night in poor quarters, candles burned low before little wooden saints and prayers settle like frost on window panes. Mothers count sons. Masters count apprentices. The city lives because cities must, but the sound it makes now is different. Shoemakers hammer more softly. Tavern doors open less widely. The market voices never quite rise to a shout. Far north, a tall young noble with a narrow face listens to a trader speak the news twice and then again. His name is Gustav Eriksson of the Vasa line. He has been a hostage in Denmark and a fugitive in forests. He hears that Sture's widow is under guard and that the men who held Stockholm are ash. He asks for the road west, toward Mora and the miners, and for a pair of skis because the snow lies deep between villages. He sets off without trumpets. Revolts often do. North of the frozen lakes, Gustav Vasa moves like a knife through cloth. He takes back roads, sleeps in barns, trades a ring for a cloak. In villages the talk is all the same. The king has made peace, say some. The king has made ashes, say others. Gustav tells what happened in Stockholm, how bishops fell and Sten Sture was dragged from his grave, how Christina Gillenstierna rides under guard to a ship with no name. He asks for men, for pikes, for a promise. Most stare into their cups. Winter is long, and Denmark is near. He reaches Mora with snow squealing under the runners of his skis. In the parish hall, the miners and farmers crowd close, faces weathered the color of iron. Gustav speaks plainly because the air is too cold for flourishes. If you wait, he says, the blood will reach here. If you rise now, the road south is ours. The elders look at the hearth and at their boys in the doorway. They ask who will feed the cattle if the men march. They remember past punishments and the way royal writs bite. The vote is no. Gustav bows once, shoulders his pack, and turns his skis west toward the Norwegian border. That night the wind barks along the eaves, and the men of Mora do not sleep. A rider arrives with news from Stockholm that tastes of salt and ash. In kitchens, mothers whisper the names on the lists. At dawn, the elders pound on doors and call for the two fastest skiers. Olaf and Lars push off in the Rime hard morning, poles biting deep, breath pluming like smoke. They follow the thin line of Gustav's track into the spruce and out onto a white plain where the horizon is a blade. They catch him near Sälen as the light begins to fail. He turns at the hiss of his pursuers and sees red faces, cracked lips, hands lifted not for capture but for plea. Come back. We were wrong. The parish will stand. He closes his eyes as if listening for an answer that is not in the wind. Then he nods. They lash on their fur hoods and point their skis toward Mora. In weeks that follow, church bells in Dalarna ring a new measure. Men meet with axes over their shoulders and pikes made from hay rakes. They swear in the snow to follow Gustav as Huvudman, captain of the folk. Deputies of the king feel the ground tilt under their boots. A bailiff rides out with a small guard and does not return. Smelting fires in the copper hills glow through the night as forges hammer spearheads from scrap. The rebellion has no banners at first, only winter clothes, parish staves, and a story that will not stay in one town. But its front edge is sharp. It points south. Winter teaches the revolt how to move. Men from Dalarna travel on skis, drag sledges for powder and bread, cut pike shafts from young fir, and iron their tips at village forges. They do not march like a court army. They appear at dawn in a white silence, rise out of woods like smoke, and vanish when the sun turns the snow to water. Danish riders try to give chase and find their horses sinking to the hocks, while red-faced miners slide past the drifts as easily as river trout. The first targets are small but loud, lonely blockhouses at bridges, customs posts on winter roads, storehouses where the king's men keep grain they counted twice. At one outpost, the garrison wakes to find its gate jammed with felled poles and the courtyard full of men in wool who will not run when pistols crack. The captain surrenders by noon and leaves his keys on the threshold. The parish priest blesses the keys. Someone nails them to the church door as if to say that this place has learned who owns it. Word travels faster than sledges. Fallon, the copper town, weighs its choice and sends what it has. Bars and coin, leather for slings, powder for the few guns Gustav can gather. The mines burn before dawn and cool only after dark. The revolt finds a purse and a heart. With copper to pledge, Gustav writes to German merchants who dislike Danish tolls and to Hanseatic skippers who measure politics in freight and harbour dues. Answers will take months, and the ice must melt before ships can carry promises. But the first letters are on the water beneath the floes. There are setbacks and funerals. A troop pushes too far onto a ploughed road and meets landsknechts in steel. Peasant pikes shatter against halberds, and men go down in a heap of ash-coloured cloaks and red wool caps. At night, the survivors count names under a roof that leaks and vow to learn. They drill with pikes until arms burn. They listen to men who fought in the south and learn to break a line by hitting the flank instead of the front. By March, they no longer look like a crowd. They look like a force. Towns rid the weather. Westeros hesitates behind its walls, while farmers camp in orchards and blow on their hands over small fires. A gate opens at dusk to admit a wagon of straw and does not close quite fast enough. In the dark that follows, a ladder appears where no ladder was. Come morning, a Danish flag is down, and a parish banner of St. Eric flaps in the river wind. Gustav does not linger. He leaves a garrison and a message for any captain with ears. We are not a rumor in the trees anymore. Christina Gyllenstierna's name moves with the columns like a quiet drum. Mothers speak it when they hand bread to men in the road. Old soldiers say that if the widow could keep Stockholm fed under cannon, then men with full lungs can keep their feet under them in a skirmish. In the castle on the hill above the capital, a Danish governor hears these stories and looks often toward the harbour ice, calculating what it will bear and how long his stores will last if the hinterland goes to the rebels one parish at a time. Spring rot lifts the snow from the fields and turns roads to ruts. With the thaw come carts, and with carts come guns borrowed and bought, squat iron mouths that speak a new grammar to stone and timber. The rebellion has changed season. It has learned to pull a siege line tight and to wait. Inside the walls, garrisons listen for relief drums that no longer sound. Outside the walls, men in wool sit with their backs against wheels and pass a cup. When they speak of Stockholm, they do not use the word if anymore. They use when. Spring loosens the harbours, and with the ice, a new ally arrives. Letters Gustav sent in winter reach the halls of Lübeck, where merchants count profit in tons of grain and barrels of copper. They know Christians' tolls and seizures too well. They also know a story that sells better than any clause. The slaughter in Stockholm moves hearts and hardens minds. A city bled at a coronation is the kind of tale a republic of traders can turn into policy. Envoys cross the Baltic in short, cold hops, ship to ship, port to port. They bring promises of privileges if Sweden stands free in the sound of copper bars thudding onto counting tables. Meetings stretch late under painted beams. The Hansa towns want trade without Danish chains. Gustav wants powder, guns, and men who drill for pay. The bargain writes itself. Lübeck will lend ships and hire captains. It will float cannon north and sell credit on generous terms. In return, it will have first pick at Swedish markets and friendly dues along the coast once the war is won. Support arrives not only in iron, but in ink. Printers in Lower Saxony carve blocks that show priests cut down, and a gallows silhouette over a skyline that looks suspiciously like Stockholm. Broadsheets blame the slaughter on a tyrant and praise the miners of Dalarna who rose with their parish staves. The sheets travel faster than fleets. By the time the first guns nose into a Swedish river, the countryside already hums with a version of the truth that helps recruits step forward. With spring, the revolt grows into a war. Columns move beyond forests and parish lines. They skirt strongholds they cannot yet crack and take what holds the strongholds together. Bridges, mills, ferry landings, messenger posts. A Danish governor rides out to break a camp and finds trenches where there were none the week before, gabions filled with earth and brush, and a handful of small guns that bark louder than their size. He falls back to stone and sends for help that does not come. Towns feel the wind shift. Uppsala opens its gates and swears to the regent. Örebro yields after a bombardment that is more thunder than ruin, but enough to teach garrisons that relief is a rumor. Westeros is held, then lost, then held again. Each change of banner buying Gustav more time to train men who were farmers in January and can wheel a pike block by June. From the south come scattered tidings that taste like chants. Christian's hand grows heavier at home, and friends turn wary. The king spends coin faster than he mints obedience. Nobles in Denmark mutter about the bloodbath having poisoned more than Stockholm. A man can be feared and still be called king. A man called tyrant begins to find doorways narrower than before. On the water, the Hans flag begins to matter, a handful of hulks and cogs, nothing like an armada, but enough to make a captain in Stockholm look twice before he sends a convoy out past Vaxholm. Powder comes in, timber rafts go out as payment, and with each crossing, the blockade tightens by habit if not by decree. The castle above the capital keeps its cannon clean and its tables set. The city below counts barrels. Christina Gillenstierna's name remains in the letters that pass under seals. Writers place her in a convent cell in Denmark, then in a castle by the sea, then always in a sentence that ends with the same hope. She lives, and that simple fact serves the rebellion better than 100 sermons. It lets men say aloud what they already believe. This began with a feast that turned to slaughter. It will end when the city that watched it opens its gates to another kind of feast. Summer turns the siege from rumor into weather. The countryside around Stockholm no longer belongs to the king. Ferries answer to parish captains. Bridges have watchmen who wear wool caps instead of royal badges. On the water, a handful of Hanse ships sit like dark teeth at the harbour mouth. They are not many, but they are enough. Powder comes in, hope goes out. Inside the capital, the Danish governor counts barrels and days. The fortress of 3 crowns keeps its discipline. The town below keeps its nerves by habit alone. Bakers stretch flour with bran and talk of autumn that feels far away. Fishermen slip past the blockade at night with nets that come back light as spiderwebs. A bell rings for mass, and men cross themselves twice, not out of piety, but to mark time. Relief will come, the governor says. He rehearses the sentence until it fits in his mouth. Outside the walls, Gustav's camp is no longer a ring of parish fires. Trenches lip the ditches, gabions sprout like coarse plants. Light guns squat behind raw timber. Men in clogs learn to move as squares and to turn as if a single hinge held them. Copper from Phelan buys more iron mouths. Lubeck captains school river pilots in the work of choking a harbour without losing a ship. Between sorties, messengers run with letters that begin to read like habits. Lay down your arms and keep your lives. Refuse, and keep only your pride. The summer brings scenes that never make the proclamations. A nursemaid in the town watches her charge gnaw a crust and bites her own fist so the child will not see her cry. A soldier on the rampart pincers a flea and remembers a meadow in Funen. In the camp, a parish priest blesses a cart turned into an altar, and stairs creak under men who take the host before a push at dawn. On the water, 2 cogs trade cannon shots that splash short and then close to musket range where smoke hides the distance. A lucky ball knocks a rudder off, and the crippled ship slews, does not sink, but cannot face the wind again. The blockade tightens one unglamorous notch. In Denmark, Christian's crown begins to slide on sweat. The blood he spilled in Stockholm darkens every hall he enters. Credit tightens. Cousins frown. The dukes of Holstein and nobles who tolerated a hard hand blanch at a hand called tyrant. A king can rule by fear so long as fear stays in his camp. When it crosses the water, fear recruits for the other side. News of quarrels in Copenhagen reaches the Baltic in the pockets of sailors who talk for beer. Stockholm reads those rumors like scripture. Autumn creeps in with a knife between its teeth. The marshes around the city go brown and stiff. The wind sharpens. The water tastes of iron. A truce is offered for a week to bury the dead and is spent mostly counting the living. Gustav's envoys walk under flags to the gate and come back with faces that give nothing away. Inside, The governor moves garrison families into fewer streets to save fuel. Outside, men fell trees and build sledges because they know what a Swedish winter can do to an army and to a town. When the first skim of ice pearls the inlets, the siege changes key. Night patrols crunch instead of splash. The blockade, once a row of teeth, becomes a jaw. Scribes in both camps dip thin pens and note quiet counts. Barrels, loaves, shot, days. A captain draws a finger along the map's black line where the ring tightens and then taps the walled hill at its center. He has nothing eloquent to say, only this. When the sea freezes, the city belongs to whoever owns the road. Winter closes like a fist. The sea hardens along the quays and turns the blockade into a wall. Inside Stockholm, the governor measures flour by the handful and stretches rations with bran and pea meal until loaves taste of dust. Fishermen drag sleds over ice to set nets in blackleads and return with stringers so thin they look like wire. Rats grow scarce. In warm corners of cellars, women boil leather scraps and tell children that spring will come if they sleep. Outside the walls, the rebel camp learns winter craft. Men bind straw under their clogs, grease bowstrings, and bank fires in pits so smoke will not carry. Couriers skate the inlets at night with letters under their shirts. Lübeck sends a slow drip of powder and a few gunners who have made their living teaching towns how to aim. Small guns find angles along the frozen shore and crack at tower slits that answer more slowly each week. The governor still speaks of relief. He points a gauntlet toward the south and says that a fleet will break the ice and a column will clear the roads. He keeps faces steady with drills and prayers, and the old soldier's trick of naming days in short lines. Monday for the ramparts, Tuesday for the magazines, Wednesday for the carpenters to mend ladders, Thursday for confession, Friday for roll call. The rhythm works until it does not. In Denmark, the king's chair tilts, credit collapses, cousins hedge, and the word tyrant walks the halls like a draft. Christian tries to pull the kingdom tighter and it slips through his fingers. By spring of 1523, another crown is raised for another man, and the king who bled Stockholm rides away from Copenhagen in haste, promising returns that fewer and fewer believe. News crosses the Baltic in the mouths of skippers who grin when they tell it. In the rebel lines, men laugh into their sleeves and then go on with their work because laughter does not move walls. South of the Mälaren, the road begins to carry a different kind of traffic. Parish levies march two abreast with better pikes and a steadier step. Wagons rumble with hoops for new barrels and sacks of powder that no one jokes about. Gustav rides the line in a faded cloak, nodding to men who have survived 2 winters, promising the same plain thing he promised in the snow at Mora. This ends when the city opens. Until then, we breathe. And we push. Christina Gillenstierna's name returns to the campfire talk like a refrain. News places her behind stone in Denmark, and then loses her again. Mothers stir porridge and speak her name low as a prayer. Old soldiers say the widow who kept cannons fed will see the capital open to a different banner if there is any justice left above the clouds. No one speaks of vengeance in grand words. They speak of burial, of carrying bones home, of a square that needs washing with water, not blood. When the drift ice breaks and the inlets darken, the siege shifts once more. The harbour mouth shows clear lanes patrolled by Hansa sails. On the hill, the citadel burns more fuel than it can spare to keep men on the walls through cold nights that still bite. In the town below, the bell rings fewer hours because wood is dear. The governor calls a council and folds his hands while captains argue about provisions and honor. Outside, under a grey sky that smells of thaw, a drummer beats a slow measure that means assembly. The men who answer it have waited 2.5 years for this season. They do not say if anymore. They say, now. The ice loosens on the inlets, and the city's breath shows less in the air. Drips fall from the eaves of the Three Crowns while the governor watches the harbours with a face that has learned to give nothing away. In the rebel lines, men oil axles and scrape winter from wagon hoops. Powder comes upriver under Hanse flags. Letters pass the blockade like fish under a weir. One of them carries the news that matters most. In a church at Strängnäs, the estates have raised Gustav Vasa to a crown. The rebellion is no longer a plea. It is a kingdom in the making. Parley flags appear on the walls and come down again. The governor asks for relief that will not arrive and for terms that will not disgrace his record. Gustav's captains ask for the gates and for the city whole. While they argue, the blockade does the quiet work that arguments cannot undo. Barges do not enter. Loaves do not multiply. Families move closer, together to save fuel. The bell rings the hours and sounds thinner each day. Then the line breaks at last, not in a roar, but in a set of choices that become one. A postern opens at dawn for a cart and does not close fast enough. A tower that should have answered a signal stays mute because there is no powder to waste. A gate that has been tested for weeks surrenders to the same pressure that has bent it 100 times before. This time it gives. The garrison withdraws to the upper works, then from the upper works to terms. On a long afternoon in early summer, the city below opens. Men who have waited 2 winters step through the gate as if walking into a house they once owned. Stockholm does not cheer loudly, it exhales. Barrels appear in the lanes. Water runs red for a moment, where men scrub old stains from stones that still hold the shape of a feast turned to killing. In the square where heads once stood on poles, women spread cloths for soup kitchens. A parish banner goes up beside a merchant's flag, and neither looks like a conqueror's sign. They look like a promise that the city will be run by its own again. Gustav rides in without gilding the scene. The cloak is plain. The salute is short. The words are the same he has used since Mora. This ends, he says, and we begin. Lubeck captains shake hands with guild elders. Priests bless the living and whisper for the dead. A clerk, careful as ever, writes the first new ordinances in a hand that steadies as the ink dries. Somewhere in Denmark, a door closes on a king who has lost the room. Christian's cousins choose another to wear their crown. He rides away with the word tyrant stitched to his back like a shadow. Christina's Gyllenstierna's road bends toward home at last. In letters and fireside talk, her name has done the work of a standard. Now the woman returns to a city that remembers what her steadiness bought and what the blood cost. The harbour smells of salt and tar, and something like relief. The season turns. The map changes with it. After the gates open, the work is inventory and oath. Keys pile on tables. Seals change hands. Captains swear to a king who was a fugitive the winter before. The Hanse's ships lift anchor at last. Their holds lighter, their ledgers full of future clauses. In churches, bells try on a happier sound and succeed by habit. The square that once burned with torches now hosts a market of buckets and brooms. The city behaves as cities do when terror has passed. It heals by counting. The story does not end with the last surrender. It begins to harden into memory. Printers carve blocks that show the bloodbath as the seed of a nation. Ballads give Stennstur a second death and a hero's return in ash. Children grow up knowing that a feast can turn into a gallows if a parchment promise is placed between a crown and a priest with a ledger of grievances. The lesson is repeated in guild halls and at winter ovens. Believe oaths, but keep your own keys. Christian's fate becomes a footnote that still throws a long shadow. Deposed, exiled, returned and caged again, he lives on as a warning about what a ruler may run on for a time, but cannot run on forever. Fear is a poor currency for a long reign. The men who chose to call him tyrant did not need philosophers to explain why. Gustav's Sweden is not born whole. It is argued into being city by city, tithe by tithe, with copper pledged and privileges negotiated, with quarrels over faith that will widen into a reformation. But the ground under those arguments is firm because the bloodbath made certain decisions easy. No one wants a king who arrives with amnesty in one hand and a bill of heresy in the other. No one wants justice announced from a balcony while ropes are measured in the yard. The square remembers, and the square votes with its feet when trouble comes again. Christina Gillenstierna steps back into the streets she defended and becomes what history rarely grants its heroines. She becomes an adult who lives on. She marries again. She keeps counsel. She's spoken of with respect in houses that once whispered her name like a password. The city she helped to save grows around her into a capital with a new coat of arms and a habit of watching the harbour for sails that mean trade rather than siege. Stand in the square on a clear morning and the stones look innocent. You can buy bread without tasting ash. You can hear the bell without thinking whether it tolls for feast or for killing. Yet if you put your palm on the wall where the proclamations were nailed and close your eyes, you can still feel the grain of a sentence that would not hold, a coronation that promised mercy, a court that found heretics where it needed them, a city that learned to distrust a certain tone in a ruler's voice. That is the legacy of the Stockholm Bloodbath. Not only the count of the dead, but the map it drew for the living. Do not mistake ceremony for safety. Do not let a pardon be written with an asterisk only a priest can read. Do not let a tyrant borrow the vestments of the church to dress a killing. The feast that turned to slaughter ended with a different kind of feast. Not wine and song, but bread and repair. Not oaths from a balcony, but hands on keys and a door opened from the inside.